I heard Allie K describe something she does with her AI agents several times a day. She sends them 3 words. Do smart things. And apparently, that's enough for the agents to look at what's going on, decide what matters, and figure out what to do next.
And one of the best prompts that I have done with my AI workforce is 3 words. So the best prompt, 3 words, and it's just do smart things.
That sounded either genuinely important or like one of those AI claims that works only because nobody stops to test it. So I built a business situation where the right answer is not obvious, gave ChatGPT exactly the same information several times, and changed only the final instruction. The results surprised me. Before we start, there is an important distinction. Allie is talking about AI agents. Agents can have access to things like email, calendars, documents, company systems, memory, and tools. I'm not testing all of that here. I wanted to isolate one specific part of the claim. How much instruction does a capable AI actually need when it already has the relevant context? So I used plain ChatGPT. Same model. Fresh conversation every time. Same business situation. The only thing I changed was the instruction at the end. And to make this useful, I needed a situation where there wasn't an obvious answer. Meet Marc. Marc is the CEO of Nexera IT Services, a 15-person IT company in Paris. Nexera makes about 1.65 million euros a year, with roughly 145,000 euros in operating profit. The company is stable, but growth has slowed. Marc wants to reach 3 million euros in revenue within 3 years, while gradually moving away from low-margin support work and toward cloud services, cybersecurity, automation, and managed services. Then Nexera receives the biggest opportunity in its history. A logistics company called Orion wants Nexera to become its primary IT partner. The contract is worth 920,000 euros per year for 3 years. That would increase Nexera's revenue almost overnight from 1.65 million to roughly 2.57 million euros. For a 15-person company, that's enormous. But Orion wants 24/7 support, cybersecurity monitoring, infrastructure management, application support, and very aggressive SLAs. Nexera would probably need to hire 7 people. That would cost somewhere between 540,000 and 610,000 euros in the first year. And then comes the dangerous part. Orion can terminate after 12 months if service targets aren't met. So Nexera takes on the employees, the cost, the organizational change, and the execution risk, while Orion keeps a relatively easy exit. Inside Nexera, everyone sees the opportunity differently. Sales wants the deal. Their argument is simple. A company of this size doesn't get offered nearly 1 million euros a year very often. The CTO is worried that Orion will consume 35 to 40% of technical capacity and kill an internal automation platform the team has spent months building. Operations is worried about burnout. The company currently works mostly normal business hours. Orion would introduce nights, weekends, on-call rotations, and permanent firefighting. Finance thinks the deal could be very profitable. But if Orion leaves after the first year, Nexera could be left with 7 extra employees and only 260,000 euros in cash reserves. There are 3 competing suppliers. Marc has until Friday to submit the proposal. That was the context I gave ChatGPT. The first test was deliberately boring. I pasted the scenario into a fresh conversation and asked, what should Marc do next? ChatGPT gave a strong answer. It didn't tell Marc to simply accept the deal. It didn't tell him to reject it either. It recommended conditional negotiation, reduce the termination risk, negotiate compensation if Orion leaves early, phase the onboarding, protect some of the product team, limit Nexera's downside before committing to the upside. That's roughly what I would expect from a good strategy consultant looking at the situation. So this became the baseline. Then I opened a new conversation, using the same model and scenario, but this time, instead of asking what Marc should do, I wrote, do the smart thing. And this is where it became interesting. The answer was basically the same. ChatGPT identified the same central risk. It again concluded that accepting the contract exactly as proposed was too dangerous, while rejecting it immediately would throw away a potentially transformative opportunity. It independently arrived at negotiation as the best move. It talked about reducing the termination exposure, protecting cash, phasing hiring, and preserving some engineering capacity for the automation platform. In other words, those 3 words were enough. At first glance, this looks like confirmation. Maybe do the smart thing really is an incredibly effective prompt. Except there was a problem with that conclusion. The model already had a lot of context, so I wanted to know whether those exact words were doing anything special. For the third test, I made the context harder. I removed the sections that explained what the dilemma was. I removed the proposed strategies. I removed sentences like, this is the dangerous part, or Marc sees the asymmetry. Instead, I presented the information more like raw company material. A sales email with the Orion offer, a staffing estimate, a contract excerpt, a message from the CTO, an operations note, a finance memo, a calendar showing the management meeting and Friday deadline. I wanted ChatGPT to do more than solve the problem. I wanted it to first recognize what the problem actually was. Then I gave it the same instruction. Do the smart thing. Again, the result was basically the same. It reconstructed the dilemma from the raw information, found the main risks, and proposed nearly the same strategy. At this point, the three-word idea was looking surprisingly strong. So I tried to break it. I opened another fresh conversation. Same context. This time I wrote, help, that's it. And ChatGPT still produced essentially the same strategic answer. This changes the interpretation quite a lot. Because if help works just as well as do the smart thing, then there probably isn't anything special about the phrase itself. The model already understood the situation. Once I gave it even a very weak signal that I wanted useful assistance, it inferred what kind of assistance made sense. So naturally, I tried something even worse. I wrote, banana, and ChatGPT gave me a banana, which, scientifically speaking, was useful, because it showed that the final instruction still matters. The model wasn't just ignoring whatever I typed and solving the CEO problem automatically. Then I tried giving it nothing. I loaded the scenario and stopped. ChatGPT responded that it understood the situation and asked me what instruction I wanted to test. This was probably the most useful control of the entire experiment, because now we have three different behaviors. Give it nothing and it waits. Give it something unrelated like banana, and it follows the unrelated instruction. But give it even a tiny semantically relevant signal, like help, and it can infer the rest from the context. So the prompt matters. It just seems to matter far less than we usually assume. I think the interesting part is not the phrase, do smart things. It's the relationship between context and instruction. Imagine handing an experienced business consultant a complete file containing the contract, financials, staff concerns, strategic goals, and deadline. Then you say, help. They probably don't need another paragraph explaining what you mean. They can look at the material and infer the job. A modern LLM is increasingly capable of doing something similar. The context narrows the space of reasonable responses so much that the instruction can become extremely small. The model sees a CEO, a large contract, termination risk, capacity problems, financial exposure, and a deadline. So when you say help, the most reasonable interpretation is, help solve this. That means the intelligence is not inside those three words. The words are acting more like a trigger. Most of the useful information was already somewhere else. And this is where Miller's claim starts making much more sense. In my experiment, I manually pasted the context into ChatGPT. But imagine an actual agent that already has access to your calendar, email, project status, business goals, previous conversations, customer messages, and internal documents. Now, do smart things becomes much more plausible, not because the phrase is magical, because the agent may already know enough about the situation that you don't have to explain the task every time. And that may be the more important shift. For decades, software needed us to specify exactly what we wanted done. With capable AI systems, we may increasingly provide the goal and the environment, and let the system infer the next useful action. That is a much bigger idea than a clever prompt. So did the three-word prompt pass the test? Yes, with a qualification. Do the smart thing worked extremely well in my experiment. But help worked too, and banana didn't. So I don't think there's anything special hiding inside those three words. What surprised me is how little instruction the model needed once it understood the situation. The real lesson here isn't, use this magic prompt. It's this. The better the context, the less prompting may matter. And if AI agents eventually have rich, continuous access to our working context, three words might actually be more than enough. Not because the words are smart, because the system already knows what they mean.